Good morning. Here's your Intel report for Monday, November 28, 2022. Inside the Beltway. White House, President Biden is scheduled to host a congratulatory meeting with Nobel Prize winners from the United States. Congress, the Senate will resume consideration of H.R. 8404, the Respect for Marriage Act. State, Secretary Blinken is scheduled to attend the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Bucharest, Romania. The meeting will focus on the war in Ukraine, implementation of NATO's new strategic concept, and NATO efforts in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and Moldova. Domestic intelligence summary. Food and water security remain long-term domestic concerns. Currently, the U.S. is experiencing significant drought conditions that have affected the Colorado River Basin and Mississippi River. The second-order effect of the drought is inflation of food prices and uncertainty over future crop yields. Drought conditions are hitting the beef and dairy industry particularly hard, affecting both pastures used for grazing and the farming of hay feed for the winter. The avian flu outbreak that has killed more than 50 million birds so far this year will also increase pressure on poultry prices. Senators urge Biden administration to address amoxicillin shortage. Senators Klobuchar, Democrat Minnesota, Cassidy, Republican Louisiana, Brown, DOH, and Markey, Democrat Massachusetts, sent a letter urging Health and Human Services and the Food and Drug Administration to convene the Drug Shortage Task Force and identify causes and potential solutions to the amoxicillin shortage. Amoxicillin is a popular antibiotic drug. The senators also requested an update from the FDA on steps taken to prevent and mitigate drug shortages. California farms face $3 billion loss, governor considering organic farm rule. According to a report by the California Department of Food and Agriculture, the driest 3-year period on record has resulted in a $3 billion, about $9 per person in the U.S., revenue loss for California farmers after a total of 1.3 million acres, about the area of Delaware, went unplanted in 2021 and 2022. The Central Valley, which grows about 1/4 of all food in the U.S., has experienced most of the revenue loss. According to the report, 70% of irrigated land in the Colorado River Basin is used to grow feed for livestock, and drought has already pushed prices higher. Governor Newsom is considering a push to increase organic farming to 30% of all agricultural production. According to an analysis by ERA Economics, this policy could crash the organic produce market and increase consumer prices. Avian flu outbreak in Nebraska. According to the Nebraska Department of Agriculture, the state's 13th case of avian flu will require culling an additional 1.8 million chickens. The U.S. Department of Agriculture said that more than 52 million birds have been killed in 46 states due to avian flu infection. California Commission approves desalination plant. The California Coastal Commission voted to approve a permit for California American Water to operate a desalination plant in Monterey Bay, California. The project would produce 4.8 million gallons per day in the first phase, with the option to grow to 6.4 million gallons per day. Southern Ogallala Aquifer will run dry within 30 years, according to a Morningstar Sustainalytics and the Water Council report. The southern part of the Ogallala Aquifer in the Great Plains will run out of water within the next 3 decades. Based on an assessment by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, analysts say the agricultural industry in the Great Plains is extracting water faster than it can be replenished. Geostrategic Intelligence Summary. Russia-NATO Situation Report. Ukraine grain exports down 31.9%. Ukraine's Agriculture Ministry reported grain exports are down 31.9% from last year's numbers and down 25% from last month. Ministry officials said they only expect to export 3 million tons during the month of November, significantly less than last month's 4.2 million tons. They blamed the decrease on Russia's reduction of cargo inspections, which are part of the United Nations-sponsored Black Sea Grain Agreement. A Ukrainian official also claimed that Black Sea ports were only operating at 50% of their capacity. A reduction in grain exports was the foreseeable outcome of Ukraine's maritime drone attack on Russia's Black Sea fleet as well as the overall conflict, which is raging in southern Ukraine along its Black Sea coast. The reduction in exports will impact food availability in developing nations that rely on Ukrainian grain. It is unlikely that Ukrainian exports will reach pre-invasion levels anytime in the next few years, resulting in higher prices for wheat in global markets. Poland requests German Patriot batteries be sent to Ukraine. Polish defense officials have requested Patriot air defense batteries offered by Germany to bolster Polish air defenses be sent to Ukraine instead. Polish President Andrzej Duda said the request made sense from a military point of view that the missiles be placed in Ukraine, as that positioning would enable them to protect Ukraine and Poland most effectively. Noting the systems could be sent without NATO troops, Duda said the decision was the responsibility of the German government, and his country would also welcome their deployment in Poland. German government officials said they were talking with their allies regarding how to handle Poland's suggestion. NATO joins Finnish Frozen Winds exercise, several vessels sailing under the NATO flag, a U.S. Navy destroyer, a U.S. P-8 Poseidon, and the 2nd Marines Logistics Detachment joined the Finnish military in their Frozen Winds exercise this week. A total of 23 vessels and 5,000 personnel will be participating. The exercise is intended to train personnel in how to conduct joint operations in harsh winter conditions. It will also increase Finnish-NATO interoperability. China and Indo-Pacific Situation Report. Chinese protesters, police clash over zero-COVID policies, demonstrators clashed with Chinese state security forces across China's major urban areas Sunday night, according to multiple international media outlets and social media accounts reporting from China. The clashes are part of protests over China's draconian zero-COVID policies and erupted after a deadly fire that killed 44 residents of a high-rise building in Urumqi, Xinjiang province. The residents were physically locked in their apartments under COVID restrictions and unable to flee while firefighters attempted to access the locked-in residence. Social media images show protesters fighting with security forces, setting up roadblocks with automobiles, and refusing to comply with COVID lockdown procedures in Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, Lanzhou, and several cities in China's western provinces. So far, the protests have been limited to moderate civil disobedience and rioting with some property damage and skirmishes with security forces. There have been no reported armed attacks on government facilities or officials. Further escalation of protests is unlikely unless President Xi Jinping loses the support of China's elite and its military commanders. Taiwan president steps down from party leadership after historic election losses. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen resigned from the head of her ruling party after staggering midterm election losses that put the opposition Kuomintang in charge of 22 municipalities. It was the worst loss for the Democratic Progressive Party in its 36-year history. Tsai remains the president of Taiwan, however the Kuomintang are now running local governments across Taiwan. Also of note, in August, Kuomintang representatives sent a high-level delegation to mainland China for talks with Chinese Communist Party officials. Tsai's DPP has carried a hard line against reunification with China. This defeat could lead to third-way politics via the Kuomintang, which China is probably already supporting or would support if given the opportunity. Pakistan appoints ISI spymaster to head of army. The Pakistani government announced the appointment of Lieutenant General Asim Munir, former chief of Pakistani intelligence, as the new chief of the nation's army. Pakistani Defense Minister Khawaja Asif said the appointment was based on merit and law in line with the country's constitution. Regional analysts note little is known about the general's foreign policy views and say that he will have to find a way to run a hybrid government without being unnecessarily visible. The appointment comes amid growing civil unrest as former Prime Minister Imran Khan continues his protest march on the capital to demand early elections. Khan has repeatedly blamed the Pakistani army for aiding in ousting him from his position. Global Situation Report. Cuba partners with China to advance communist core interests. At a meeting in Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermudez announced a pledge of mutual support for the core interests of communist states. Saying China and Cuba will go hand in hand down the road of building socialism with each's own characteristics, Xi praised the partnership for strengthening cooperation in regional and international affairs. The announcement follows a similar pledge made by Russian President Vladimir Putin during a visit to Moscow by Díaz-Canel, recognizing the traditional friendship between Russia and Cuba. Chevron Corp receives license to expand Venezuela oil production. According to U.S. Treasury officials, Chevron Corporation has received a license to operate alongside Venezuela's PDVSA state-backed energy company and export its oil to U.S. markets. The decision grants broader rights for the last big U.S. oil company still operating in U.S.-sanctioned Venezuela. However, it restricts any cash payments to Venezuela, which could reduce the oil available to export. A U.S. Treasury official said the license would last for 6 months and then receive automatic review thereafter. Honduras declares state of emergency. Gang control of countryside. Honduras President Xiomara Castro declared a national security emergency on Friday over a rising tide of gang violence and criminal activity. Castro said the state of emergency was to help strengthen efforts to recover lawless areas in neighborhoods, in villages, and in departments. Under the temporary measures, Castro deployed 20,000 police agents, placed new travel controls on roads, and imposed financial restrictions on money transfers. Honduras loses about 3% of GDP to gang crime, including extortion. MS-13 and Barrio Mara 18 are the largest and most prevalent gangs, which of late had imposed war taxes on public bus drivers, torching buses and murdering drivers who refused to comply. Low-intensity conflict intelligence summary. Washington, D.C. Size, TBD. Activity, far-left activists organize a No More Police, community conversation and organizing fair. New York Times best-selling author Mariam Kaba and attorney and organizer Andrea J. Ritchie headline the fair. Location, Eaton, D.C., 1201K St. N.W., Washington, D.C. Time, 1830, Monday, November 28. Seattle, Washington. Size, TBD. Activity, Seattle Mutual Aid Fair organized by Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club. Location, Black Lives Memorial Garden, 11th and Olive, Seattle, Washington. Time, 1600, Tuesday, November 29. End report.